You wake up. The first thought is no longer yours. It's an installed concern, a list, an anxiety, a name, a situation that was left unfinished yesterday. Even before you open your eyes, before your body is fully awake, the machine is already running. You didn't turn it on. It just started. You get up, have coffee, check your phone. And at some point in this automatic ritual, which has been repeating with minimal variations for years, you convince yourself that you're in control, that the choices you'll make today are yours, that the path you're walking was decided by you, for you, with full awareness and full intention. And that conviction is as natural, as automatic as breakfast itself. But think for a moment. This certainty that you choose, where does it come from? Did you choose to be born where you were born? Choose the language you think in? Choose the beliefs you carry, as if they were your most intimate identity? Choose to fear what you fear? Choose to love what you love? Or did it simply happen? No, you didn't choose any of that. And yet, you believe you have free will. You believe your decisions are genuinely yours, originating from some deep and sovereign place within you. And you carry on your shoulders all the weight of that imagined authorship, the weight of having to get it right, the weight of having gotten it wrong, the weight of not knowing what you will choose tomorrow. I'm not saying you're a puppet without consciousness, dragged by forces you never understood. I'm saying something far more unsettling than that. Free will exists, yes, but it doesn't belong to who you think you are. This distinction, this almost invisible crack between the self you built over the years and what actually observes, feels, and acts beneath all of that, is what Robert Adams spent decades trying to show to those who had the courage to truly stop and listen. Stay with me, because what comes next won't give you easy answers. It will give you something far more valuable, the right questions. Imagine for a moment a life where you don't carry the constant weight of having to decide everything correctly. I'm not talking about passivity. I'm not talking about giving up, leaving everything to chance, folding your arms, and handing your life over to fate with a philosophical shrug. I'm talking about something much more subtle, and at the same time, much more transformative than any willpower resolution you've ever tried that lasted a few weeks before dissolving into the usual rhythm of days. Imagine waking up, and the first movement is silence, not an anxious emptiness. Not that silence that's just the temporary absence of noise before chaos starts again. A full silence that doesn't need approval, that doesn't need to fix anything, that simply exists with a stability no external circumstance can break. Imagine making a difficult decision, one of those that keeps you awake at 3 a.m, replaying possible scenarios as if your brain were a computer stuck in an endless loop, and realizing that the anguish doesn't come from the decision itself. It comes from the one trying to make the decision. It comes from the character, from the self built over years of experiences, traumas, expectations from others, and stories you've repeated internally so many times you began to believe they were descriptions of reality and not interpretations of it. What if there were a part of you that was never trapped in that anguish? A part that observes all of this. Thoughts, deliberations, fears, hopes projected into the future without being contaminated by any of it. Robert Adams called this the observer, not a philosophical concept reserved for those who read the right texts and studied the right traditions. A real accessible presence that you already carry, but that has been systematically covered up by the belief that the character you built over the years is all that you are. When you begin to notice this, even if it's just a crack, a second of clarity in an otherwise ordinary day, something changes. Not dramatically, not with fireworks or cinematic revelations, quietly, deeply, and irreversibly. And here's what no one tells you about free will. It exists in that crack, not in the automatism of the character that reacts to the world according to patterns recorded decades ago. In the living presence of the observer that notices those patterns without being defined by them. There's a material I prepared exactly about this. It's not a promise of quick transformation. It's not another motivational piece that gets you excited for 2 days and then disappears without leaving a real trace. It's a direct guide based on the teachings of Robert Adams on how to start recognizing the observer within you, how to identify the precise mechanism that keeps you trapped in the identity of the character, repeating the same cycles of choice and regret, and how to take the first practical steps toward a presence that doesn't depend on external circumstances to be stable. The ebook is called The Awakening of the Observer. The link is in the description of this video. Keep this in mind, because at the end of this video, after everything we're going to explore together, you'll understand exactly why this material exists and who it was created for. Robert Adams wasn't a man of grand speeches. He was quiet, uncomfortable in a way only true masters can be, because their presence asks questions you didn't ask to answer, and that, once asked, never leave you alone again. He said something that, the first time I heard it, deeply irritated me. He said, "You do nothing. You never did. And you never will. The first reaction is always resistance." Wait, isn't that nihilism? Isn't that a philosophy of irresponsibility? Isn't that an elegant excuse to remain inert while life passes and the world around demands action, presence, constant decision? No. And understanding why it's not, that understanding is the heart of what Adams taught about free will, because he wasn't saying actions don't exist. He was questioning who claims them as their own, and that is a difference that changes everything. Adams studied alongside Ramana Maharshi in India, and what Ramana taught, what Adams absorbed, lived for decades in the silence of the American desert and later, transmitted with almost brutal clarity, was that the sense of being a separate self, a self that makes decisions with total authority, that carries guilt, that claims credit, that suffers the consequences of its choices. That self is a construction, not a lie maliciously planted in you by someone. A construction that arose naturally, necessarily, as part of the process of becoming a functional human being in the world. A pattern of thought so repeated, so reinforced, so validated by the entire social environment since childhood, that it became solid in your perception, as if it were an unquestionable fact of reality, and not a map you confused with the territory. And here is the mechanism of pain that Adams named with almost surgical precision. Every time you believe you are the author of your actions, every time the self claims full authorship of what happens, you also fully assume the entire burden of what can go wrong, the weight of impossible perfection, the constant fear of error, the anxiety of the right choice in a world where variables are infinite, the corrosive guilt when things don't turn out as you planned, and the self needs to defend or punish itself to maintain its narrative of internal coherence. That's the mechanism. It's not the decision that hurts. It's the self that believes it made the decision and now needs to justify, defend, or regret that authorship before itself and the world. Think of a time you got it wrong, a decision that turned out differently than you wanted, a situation that wasn't what you expected despite all the effort you put into it. Where was the real pain? It wasn't in the situation itself. It was in the thoughts. I messed up. I should have done differently. I failed again. Not enough for this? The self that appears in these sentences. Who is that self? Can you actually point to it? Can you find it not as a concept, but as a direct and verifiable experience? Adams did this with his students. He would simply ask, with that unsettling calm, who is making this decision? Show me. Point to where it is. And what happened? People tried seriously. They searched with real honesty. And at some point, in that silent and slightly vertiginous instant, they realized they couldn't find anyone fixed. That the self that should be there solid and consistent, making decisions with full awareness and total control. Was a thought about a self, a narrative, a pattern of memories and expectations, not the self itself. This is not distant philosophical abstraction. This is verifiable. Now, in this exact moment, you're reading these words and something inside you is deciding whether to agree or resist. Let me tell you something that happened to me. There was a period in my life when I made decisions with a kind of low intensity but absolutely constant agony. It wasn't the big decisions that paralyzed me. Those I could rationalize, build mental structures, weigh pros and cons in imaginary tables until reaching a conclusion that seemed reasonable and justifiable. It was the small decisions, the everyday ones. What to say in a certain situation and what to keep to myself. How to react when someone challenged me in a way I hadn't anticipated. How to show up in a space without seeming like I was trying to show up. What to reveal and what to protect. It was exhausting. Not because the decisions were objectively difficult. It was because each one came with an underlying question I could never answer directly and definitively. Is this me? Or is this what I learned to be to survive in this environment? One day, after hours listening to Adam's recordings, those old, slightly grainy recordings from satsangs in Arizona, something very simple happened in the middle of an ordinary sentence. He said, with that calm and slightly amused voice, "The problem is not that you don't know who you are. The problem is that you believe too much in who you think you are." And something stopped. It wasn't a dramatic enlightenment. There was no golden light, no tears of recognition, no revelation that reorganized everything at once and left me transformed forever. It was more like the background noise simply dropped a few decibels. For a moment, just a moment. But in that moment I realized, in a way that wasn't intellectual, but directly felt in the body, that the self that was so busy trying to make the right decisions was the same self that created the agony of having to make them perfectly. It was a closed loop, a wheel spinning on itself and producing nothing but the exhaustion of spinning. And I had mistaken the effort of the wheel for the real movement of life. When free will stops being claimed by the character and begins to be perceived as a quality of the very presence that observes the character, everything changes in texture. Decisions still exist. Actions still happen. Responsibility remains intact, perhaps even more present than before, because now it's not distorted by the constant defense of an ego that needs to be right. But they no longer carry the suffocating weight of I need to get it right to prove I'm enough to be here. And the most surprising thing, looking back honestly, the most genuine actions of my life, the bravest ones, the ones most aligned with something I recognize as truly mine, they didn't come from prolonged, anguished deliberation. They came from a space of inner silence, where the character stopped arguing for a second and something more fundamental simply acted. Without drama, without the need for prior approval from anyone, without the anxiety of someone who needs absolute certainty before moving. Adams called this acting without the agent. The action exists. Responsibility exists. Discernment exists and is completely real. But the self that claims authorship and charges the price of that authorship in continuous suffering, that doesn't need to exist for the action to be true and complete. And when you begin to inhabit that space, even if only for moments, even if through thin threads of perception in an absolutely ordinary day, you discover that the free will you were looking for, the one that would justify all the weight you carry, was never in the character. It was in the presence the character tried, unsuccessfully, to capture and call its own. Now I want you to do something. Not later. Not when you're in silence, sitting properly, with the ideal environment. Now, while you're still here. First step, notice that you're hearing. Don't think about hearing. Just notice, with simple, direct attention, that sound is arriving. that you're making no conscious effort for this to happen. The sound comes, the perception happens, without you needing to activate anything. Now notice something more subtle. Who is noticing that you hear? There is an awareness here, a presence that is registering this entire experience, the sound, the understanding, the attention you're giving this right now. Can you notice this presence? Don't try to name it. Don't try to fit it into any philosophical or spiritual category you already know. Don't try to turn it into another object of analysis. Just notice that it's there, that it has always been there, that while you were busy analyzing every decision in your life, this presence was silently registering everything, without judgment, without effort. Second step, a thought will appear now. It might be, I'm not doing this right, or this is too abstract to work, or simply, I need to check my phone. When it appears, just notice the structure of what happens. There is a thought, and there is something that is noticing the thought. The thought is an object. It arises, exists for a few seconds, dissolves. What notices is different. It doesn't arise or dissolve in the same way. It simply is. Now the real question, the question Adams asked, and that has no intellectual answer, only direct investigation. This subject that is noticing all of this, does it have form? Does it have weight? Does it have a story that began at a certain date? Does it have a name someone gave it? Stay with this question, not to answer it with words. To feel what happens when you stop trying to answer it and simply look. Adams said that this simple investigation, done with real honesty, without rush, without the agenda of reaching a predetermined conclusion, is the doorway to what he called silent presence. Not a special state reserved for those who practiced for years. Just the recognition of what you have always been, before the entire story you built about yourself, and began to believe was definitive and non-negotiable. And now, the question that closes the circle. If there is a part of you that has no story, that was not shaped by past traumas, nor anxious about future possibilities, does that part need free will? It doesn't choose the way the character chooses. It doesn't deliberate, doesn't hesitate, doesn't fear making mistakes. It simply is. And that existence without the constant effort to prove its consistency, that is the real freedom Adams pointed to. You just went through something. It wasn't just a video about philosophy or about a master from the past century. You investigated. You looked within with a kind of honesty that isn't always comfortable. You questioned the self that carries your decisions as if they were a definitive burden. And for a moment, even if extremely brief, you touched what Adams called the observer, that which is present before any thought about who you are. That is not small. It is the beginning of what he taught as the only path to freedom that does not depend on external circumstances to exist. If you want to continue this investigation more deeply and with practical exercises based on Adams' teachings, the next step is in the description of this video. The ebook, The Awakening of the Observer, was created exactly for those who made it this far. For those who feel there is something beyond the character they learned to be, and want to verify that for themselves without intermediaries. The link is in the description. If this video touched something real, leave a like. Subscribe to the channel. What comes in the next videos follows exactly where this investigation points. Until the next meeting, not as master and student, as presence and presence.